afternoon and welcome to JS on Politics, our weekly look at what's happening in Madison and beyond with the state government and all the related issues. I'm your host, Greg Borowski. We have a very full show today with a lot happening in the news. We're going to start with the arena deal that is almost nearly, not completely, but just about done. We'll also look at how it's shaping up and who fares best in the deal. Then we'll talk about higher education, which takes its turn before joint finance on Friday. And we'll talk about the rest of the action in Madison, from abortion to teacher licenses, prevailing wage, and more. And of course, we'll take some questions from readers. We're going to start with the arena deal, and with this note, we of course don't have our ideal panel with us today because, as I'm sure many of you know, longtime Journal Sentinel reporter and editor Don Walker passed away less than a week ago. He will be greatly missed and already is. In the most recent years in his career, he turned to covering sports and business and was chasing down the details of the arena deal. That story was broken yesterday by Patrick Marley and Daniel Bice. Don, I'm sure, wishes he would have been there to chase it. But the chase goes on, so let's talk a little bit about that deal, and we're going to start with Dan. So we've seen the parameters of this now. It's the 50-50 split we expected. This one part that's easy to understand is the part from the
50-50 in terms of 50% public financing, 50% private financing.
The easy part is the private part, because we know what Herb Cole is putting in and the owners are putting in.
$100 million for Herb, $150 for the
public part's a little harder to parse our way through, so give it your best shot.
You know, when I was in school, as an elementary school kid, we had this thing every Friday where we'd get this soup where they would give us everything that we hadn't eaten during the week, and they would pour it into this thing, and we'd eat it.
Together?
It was horrible, but that's what this reminds me of. Every part of the deal, it's like everything's been thrown in there. You first have the state, which is pretty easy to understand. They have $55 million in bonds they're going to issue. It'll eventually cost about $80 million to pay off those bonds. That's easy to understand. The city's pretty easy to understand too. They're going to build a parking garage, the Tom Barrett parking garage, that will have 1,240 slots that you can park in. That'll cost about $35 million. And then they'll have a TIF district, a tax incremental financing district. And they are going to put $12 million up front and then recover the money through the TIF. And then it gets a little bit complicated. You have the Wisconsin Center District Board, which currently oversees the UWM arena, the theater, and
the
convention center. And they have several small taxes that they use to pay off the debt on those. Well, the idea is that once those debts are paid off, Wisconsin Center District will take those taxes and dedicate them to the arena, and it's going to come to about $93 million. This won't happen until the year 2028. So this deal very much backloaded. And there's a question as to whether the legislature has to vote to reauthorize those taxes, something that Walker and the Republican legislature probably won't want to do, but I mean, that's open for debate. But then it gets incredibly complicated with the county. The county has done something where they call it certifying their debt, which is basically, as I understand it, saying we currently have a firm that tries to collect our debt that we have out there. It's about $55 million worth of it. We're now going to switch that, give it to the state, and ask the state to try to collect that money for us. And we're hoping they collect at least $4 million a year for the next couple decades, and that revenue will go to the Bucks and the arena. And if they don't collect the money, then the county would have that money withdrawn from the state aid that they receive each year. So very risky.
All right, so I'm thinking I plan to buy a new car and I'm going to certify my debt to somebody else. We'll figure that all out. But let's start with Patrick Marley and Madison. I know
there's one other part of it that I forgot to mention, and that the last and this isn't any big surprise. The state has agreed to pay off the last $20 million in debt on the Bradley Center. So the state's obligation ends up being about $100 million. So go ahead.
So we were going to add all that up and make it real simple, and that's the best we could do at this stage. That's the best probably anybody can do. But Patrick, talk a little bit about the reaction in Madison and what you're hearing from the lawmakers who are going to have to pass this, and the governor who today endorsed the outlines of the plan.
Yeah, the governor today was in Portage for a business expansion. He definitely showed support for the plan as it's being developed. Didn't have a problem with extending these taxes. He and the legislators would have to approve extending these taxes for 20 years. They're otherwise set to expire. He said he was open to that. He didn't consider that a new tax because it is previously in place. Even increasing those taxes, he said, would not be a new tax because they already have the authority to raise some of those taxes. So there's support there from the legislators, but we're seeing a lot of opposition from conservatives outside of the legislature. Charlie Sykes was on the air today railing against this. Americans for Prosperity, which generally backs Republicans, very strongly opposed to it. So I think what's going to be interesting to see in the coming days is how legislators start to react to it after they're hearing this strong opposition from a certain quarter of conservatives.
So from the beginning, we knew that there would be half of this would be underwritten by the public. That's been, I mean, we've all known that. It's just now that people are realizing what that means.
Right, there shouldn't be as much of a surprise there. James, do you want to talk about, I mean, what obstacles? You know, do you think this gets done? Does it get done easily, quickly, barely, as in the Miller Park vote?
Well, it's going to get done. We know it's going to get done. But, and like I said, there's still a lot of unknowns out there. But it has to get done. And I think what I like about the deal is still complicated, but what I like about it is that everybody does have a say in this. And everyone should have a role to play in this big hodgepodge. Because if you think about it, you know, everyone benefits from this arena. And I know people like to talk about, you know, the Bucks leaving and all that other stuff. But it's everything else. Everybody else uses the arena as well. You know, it's used by Marquette basketball team. It's used for the kids shows, the ice shows, and all these other events, concerts, and all these other things. And the arena that we have right now is just too old. It's not going to work.
So there are two groups that don't have a say in this. One, the deal, as I understand it, that the county board will have no say in just about any part of this. And this is something that Chris Abley, the county executive, wanted. He wanted to bypass them and have his doing. The second is the members and the Wisconsin Center District Board. The plan would increase their authority and their influence. They would take over control of the Marcus Center for the Performing Arts and possibly merge with the Bradley Center Board. And when I talked to Frank Gimble yesterday, who's the chairman of the Wisconsin Center District Board, no one at that point, other than reporters, had talked to him about what's in this deal.
Yeah, Patrick, talk a little bit, if you could, about the role with the county here. I mean, Chris Abley, is he as popular in Madison these days as Scott Walker was? I mean, the Republicans seem to be turning to him for a lot of things, or at least taking his advice on some of the things here.
Certainly, I think that Republican lawmakers feel that they can, they can work well with him. There's a little bit of a more strained relationship with Mayor Tom Barrett from Milwaukee. He ran against Governor Walker twice. He's been he's kind of kept his cards close to his vest, at least publicly, throughout much of this. I think there's a sense among Republican lawmakers that Abley was ready to make a deal and work all angles of that to get it to happen. So they've been very praiseworthy of him so far.
So, Dan, from your understanding, are the legislative leaders all in on this? Because they're going to have to potentially do some arm twisting down the line to get the votes together. And talking yesterday to some of them, it does sound like they're going to support it. They will support it. But, it is interesting. He mentions Barrett and Abley. And it was two different strategies for this. Barrett didn't come up with it. When they needed an alternative to Walker's plan, when Walker's plan imploded, Barrett didn't come up with an elaborate plan to do this. And instead, he focused just on the city and what the city's obligations were. On the other hand, Abley, who holds season tickets to the Bucks, offered plan after plan, and this whole consolidation of the entertainment district downtown and all of that is all of an Abley production. Yeah, well, this was the previous Walker plan, of course, was the so-called jock tax, that they would steer some of that to the arena. Now that all stays going into state coffers. Maybe that's a good time to talk about winners and losers in this. Kind of go around the horn a little bit. Who's the big winner out of this one, assuming that it goes forward as we see it right now?
Well, obviously the Bucks are the big winner, and other than that, I would have to say, sorry, I got my voice. I would say Barrett is also a winner too, because Barrett didn't really have to take a big risk in this, and he's getting something done. I always think about what's your legacy going to be. And when it comes to Mayor Barrett, this could be part of a legacy.
A parking garage, that's his legacy.
A parking garage, but it's
right?
part of a bigger deal.
In terms of winners and losers, I think of it more in terms of who's gotten the most out of this. And Chris Abley has gotten, if you look at what he's done in the last 2 years, he's been able to neutralize and diminish the influence of the county board. It looks like he's going to have some input and say on Milwaukee Public Schools if the provision on that topic remains monies in the state budget, and now he's helped reshape downtown Milwaukee and its entertainment district, and has helped put together a plan for the Bucks. At the same time, he's down at the Potawatomi gambling table, taking a huge risk that this collection proposal is going to work. So it's a little early to say whether he's a winner or loser. He probably won't be around in 20 years when they're trying to come up with $4 million in debt collection. But in terms of big losers, we've mentioned Scott Walker's plan disappeared, and he hasn't been heard very much on this at all. Another possible loser is, I think you have to say, the taxpayers, particularly those who didn't want any money going to this. There is $250 million in public financing that is going to the arena.
Yeah, Patrick, what's your sense of, especially from the Madison group, I mean, the leaders there, who came out ahead or behind in this plan?
Well, a couple things. One, I think it's premature to say who the winners and losers are, because we don't know if this deal is going to come through. If it comes together, there's one set of winners. If it falls apart, then there's a very different set of winners and losers. I agree with Dan that Abley is the big winner at the moment. Seems to have been a key player in structuring this and in putting it together to his liking. I think it's to be seen how risky this certification of debt, who that's most risky for. Dan was putting forth this idea that any debt that's not collected would then come out of state aid to the county. But I think there are other ideas out there that would just see the state cough up that money rather than the county. And so I think we have to look at the actual final deal to see who is the winner and the loser on the debt certification.
Let's put a slightly different spin on it. I'm going to ask two questions. One, give me the biggest reason why this deal gets done, and then the biggest reason why it wouldn't get done. What's the biggest risk or roadblock?
Because no one wants to have it said that we lost an NBA team on their watch. I don't think anybody wants that. Plus, it could galvanize downtown Milwaukee right now. It's a pretty dead zone where the arena will be, and it will, the idea is there's a $50 million arena project plus another $500 million and another $500 million in development around that. Maybe that's a little ambitious, but it will generate some other activity. But the thing is, Milwaukee tends to go to Bucks games when the Bucks are winning. And so the new arena will probably spur attendance for a couple of years, but the bottom line is they've got to put a winning team on the court.
I agree with you. Well, no one wants to lose the NBA franchise. Even though people say, no, we don't want to pay for it. You have to pay for something. If you want to keep it, you got to pay for it. So it has to get done. And I will say the reason that it won't get done, if too many politics get in the way.
Well,
and it just won't
you
happen.
do have
You have a deadline.
You have Republicans in control, and the main critics coming out of the chute right now are conservatives who don't want public money involved in this, and so that's the potential reason that it might not get done.
Patrick,
But it could reignite downtown.
Yeah, let me ask Patrick, and we'll then close on this one for this part of the segment. But we haven't heard much from the Democrats in Madison, who, they're not in charge, but there's a significant number of votes. If Republicans start to peel off, are the Democrats, do you sense, behind this, or is that its own problem?
I think Democrats from Milwaukee and the southeastern Wisconsin region are going to be for this, but remember, this arena deal is going to be put into a state budget that Democrats hate. You won't see one Democrat voting for this state budget the way it's structured right now, with the voucher expansion, with not accepting Medicaid money. There's just too many things that are that.
All right, well, we're going to come back to the.
There's no way that if they were to peel it out the arena and make it a standalone bill, then you could get some Democratic support, but you'd lose a lot of Republicans. So
right.
as structured now, no
That's
Democrat
a good segue to our next segment, which is a taped look at what's happening with the higher education budgets. We're going to go to that right now. We're joined now by Karen Herzog, our higher education reporter, to talk about action coming up tomorrow, Friday, in Madison on the higher education budget. So Karen, the last time we were here talking about this, we were looking at the prospects for whether some of that money that was being cut could be restored. This is kind of where the rubber meets the road. What do you anticipate for the discussion on Friday?
Well, I don't know where they're going to find the money. There's still discussion that lawmakers would like to find more money for UW to reduce the cut. I have no idea how they were going to do that, although you talk to officials at UW, they still say they're optimistic.
Have you seen any change in terms of what state lawmakers are saying about their desire to, they'll say they want to restore some, but has that grown at all? Do you think the prospects are better today than they were a couple weeks ago?
Well, they've restored funding for K-12. I don't know where any additional money would come from unless they make some changes, such as Louisiana, for example, is rolling back some of its tax credits for business and manufacturing. I don't see that necessarily happening here, but there are different ways to find the money. It's just not a matter of it sitting there ready to go.
Okay, let's talk. There's a new report out from the Legislative Reference Bureau and about how we rank compared to other states around the country and in the Midwest. Tell us where that puts Wisconsin.
Oh, it's an interesting comparison. I haven't really seen Wisconsin compared to Midwestern states. Usually, we'll compare Big Ten, like for UW-Madison. Wisconsin ranks pretty far down at the bottom in terms of how much is spent per four-year degree that's awarded by the universities here, like $10,000 less than the nearest peer. Also, in terms of the amount of money that's put toward students, they call it the full-time equivalency student. I think we're second from the bottom. So it's pretty low. Wisconsin does not do well in these numbers.
Yeah, do you think that sort of report carries any weight with the state lawmakers wrestling through the budget? I mean, are they going to see that and say, hey, we should be higher because our peers are higher?
Well, that's an interesting question, because yes, they can look at that. They can also say, well, we fare really well in terms of our results, so we've got that going for us. But I don't know how that's going to shake out. There also have been the polls in recent months. I think the two of them last month, Marquette and St. Norbert, that said taxpayers don't want the $300 million cut. And I think that probably is going to have as much influence as anything.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I think that's a good spot to leave it, and we'll be following that story as it progresses. Thanks, Karen. All right, we're back live and joined by Christian Schneider, one of our editorial page columnists, and we're going to continue that discussion. Welcome back, Christian.
Thanks.
That discussion on what's happening in Madison. It's been kind of a busy week, as I'm sure Patrick can attest to. But let's start with a host of issues. There are teacher licenses. There's a bill out there, a measure out there now on, that all of us can be a teacher, right? Basically, if we get the approval of a board. Patrick,
what would you want to teach?
Well, I don't know. Well, journalism, maybe, I don't know. But Patrick, is that moving? Is that going to have problems?
Well,
Where'd that come from?
Sure, that's moving. That's been put into the state budget this week. So as of now, it's going to pass. Now, legislators could change their mind on it. When it gets to the Assembly and Senate floor, they can pull it out. But as it is right now, it's been put in the budget by the Joint Finance Committee, and it does change the standards considerably. For instance, you could have a high school dropout who has technical knowledge in an area teach a class. That's raising some eyebrows among some people, saying, should a high school dropout really be able to teach high school kids?
All right, so no one here is a high school dropout, as far as I know. But Christian, is this change a good change, a bad change? What's the rationale for it?
It's definitely not as big a deal as I think people are going to make it out to be. I mean, the teachers' unions, obviously, they have the system where they go through the teacher schools and the licensure and all that. But the state law already has something where you can get an alternate teaching license without having a license or without even having a college degree.
Well, the question is, if they pass this, will local school boards take advantage of it? And most of the school districts are opposed to this, so so the impact might be minimal in terms of that. But the idea was to help out rural school districts where they have a shortage of teachers, right?
Well, yeah, you already have private schools who.
Right.
They don't have the same requirements put on them by the state, yet almost all their teachers have college degrees, and a lot of them have the same licensure that public school teachers do. And they choose to do that because they think it's good for business. So I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of change.
All right, let's talk about prevailing wage, which was another hot topic yesterday. That had been sort of set aside by the legislative leaders. They didn't want to get into this. Then one of the lawmakers brought it up as a separate hearing, and they want to force action. The governor came out and said, hey, if it comes to my desk, I'm willing to sign it. Patrick, how do you see this sort of thing playing out? Is this going to move forward, or can the legislative leaders stop it, or what's going to happen here?
I couldn't tell you today what's going to happen with that. Prevailing wage sets a minimum wage for construction workers when they build roads, schools, other public projects that have a high dollar value. And Republicans are agreed that they want to make changes to it. Some want to repeal it. Others just say they want to raise the threshold at which the prevailing wage law kicks in. I talked to the governor today. He said he favors repealing it. That's his preferred option. That's going to put, give momentum to those who want to repeal it.
Has that always been?
Legislative leaders say they don't have the votes. They don't want to put their vulnerable members into having to vote for that, which is something that would turn the trades against their members.
Has that always been the governor's position?
His office says he's been working on it for weeks, but when we talked to him a month ago, he said he was focused on other areas of the budget. So this is new information in the last 48 hours.
Of course, it's been law for 84 years, and Republicans have been pushing this for
He's
for
been
months
on
and
it for
months.
weeks. He's been on it for at least a couple of weeks. So
Let's talk about the politics of this here. Why wouldn't the Republican leadership, which presumably agrees with the change, move forward when they have the ability to move forward?
Well, yeah, a lot of it has to do with putting their members in a vulnerable spot. I mean, Robin Vos right now is the one, talk radio is kind of hitting him for holding the whole thing up, but I'm not sure this thing would pass the Senate either. So what I think we're probably going to see is something done in the budget, unless the pressure just becomes so great on leadership, and now maybe, Walker saying he's for it now might be the thing that tips it.
yeah, it's a battle between the pragmatists and the purists.
Yep.
That you have the purists who favor this and say, why don't we get it done, like you said, and the pragmatists who think, one, it's going to be a distraction for the next week or so that when it comes up in the legislature, and two, do we want this as an election issue later on that we voted to cut wages for workers on public projects?
Let's talk about the governor, who is sort of interjecting himself in this now, or being interjected into it.
The elephant who's not been in the room.
Is this even Governor Walker's budget anymore after all the changes that we've seen, that we've gone through?
I still think the outline of it is his, but he's not been here to work out the details. And it's interesting. He comes in late on this. He came in late on other issues as well. So, but this it is right now being crafted by Robin Vos and Fitzgerald. They're the ones who are calling the shots, plus joint finance, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've disagreed on how much of a political price he's paying for not being in state and being running for president. I do think that it's not going to hurt him all that much politically, but I do think in terms of the budget that he presented, I don't think you know how much. I mean, because you don't know what's going to happen in terms of what happens with some of this stuff in the bill. Right now, you can't say that it's not going to hurt him politically. I think it's possible. Well, I'm separating the policy that they're working on right now from the political price that he's paying, because I don't think he's running again in 2018. So I don't really think he cares all that much about the politics. I do think it's all on two tracks right now. His national run going smoothly, going okay, no dip here. His numbers have been going down. He's not very visible, and his budget's being rewritten. And every week, the main story is what part of Scott Walker's budget is not around
Let's bring
anymore.
Patrick back. This is the third Governor Walker budget you've followed. How do the changes, or sort of the volume or magnitude of changes in this one compare to past ones? Is he more, less active in this one than he was in the past couple budgets?
He's certainly less active and less involved in the details on this. At the same time, you look at past budgets, there were significant changes there. All of his budgets have gone through Republican legislatures. Last time, he had an expansion of voucher schools statewide, and the Senate Republicans changed that significantly, scaled it back considerably. I think that's on par. Now, he's seeing more changes to more parts of his budgets, but I agree with Dan that the basic framework is there. They're not doing a wholesale rewrite. They're tweaking elements of it. I mean, they're not taking his arena plan, but they are doing an arena plan. So I don't think it's a real hit to him. Also, the other thing is, in Wisconsin, the governor has the final say on budgets. He's got the most powerful veto pen in the country. He can rewrite this budget. We saw Jim Doyle with legislatures that were Republicans, and he was a Democrat, and he could whole rewrite the budget with his veto pen.
But that's a question, because how much is he going to veto? Because he said he's not going to announce that he's running for president until the budget is passed. If he vetoes it, it pushes that back even further.
Well, he's not going to veto the whole budget. He's going to use his line item powers to change it. I mean, if they put in a gas tax increase, which I don't know that they would, they've talked about that, he'll absolutely veto that.
Let's touch base just briefly on the other measure that gained a lot of headlines this week, the abortion bill coming forward that would ban abortion after 20 weeks. And Governor Walker was in the news a little bit for his comments about ultrasounds and how kind of cool they are. Actually, what did he mean by that, Christian? And where do you see this going?
He's saying ultrasounds are pretty cool, and yeah, they're pretty cool.
They are
I have my
cool,
kids'
yeah.
ultrasounds in a book in my. They're pretty cool. But if you twist it to say, oh, mandatory, the war on women's pretty cool. I mean, it's hard to argue against him on the science, but to make him kind of look like an idiot, that's what they've tried to do, I think.
It is interesting what we're talking about now are all of these peripheral issues, which in the past he's been able to keep those away from the budget. And in fact, he's coming under criticism from some people in the social conservatives.
Well, he's running for president now, which is why this is
right. Plus, there's also
national.
a vacuum of power in Madison, and it allows people to insert those things with no consequences. Nobody's being called into the governor's mansion saying, "Don't do this."
Yeah.
Right. All right. We've got a series of really good reader questions this week, so we're going to try to zip through some of those in our time left. The first one is from Anti-Walker, which is either a political statement
I
or,
wonder where he's coming
or a runner. I don't know the genesis of it, but it says, isn't the governor trying to have it both ways? He's not here to get things done, but he'll sign and take credit for whatever the legislature puts in front of him. Christian.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. I mean, you saw that on Right
He's
to
a
Work.
politician. That's what all politicians do, not just
Yes.
Republicans.
So things on Right to Work, the legislature kind of bubbles up from there, and then he's there at the end, and he takes credit for it. So I think that's just good political sense.
You think Obama would do anything different? No.
All right, let me throw this one to Dan. This is from Milwaukee Tech, who said the left propelled Walker to victory by
Why do I get
vilifying.
the questions from the left? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
The question may be from the right about the left.
Okay.
This is the left propelled Walker to victory by vilifying everything he did. Do you see a parallel happening on the right by vilifying Hillary Clinton?
They're going to try to vilify Hillary Clinton, sure. Actually, the debate that's going on the left is very similar to what I was talking about that's going on the right here, and that's going to be a battle between the purists and the pragmatists. She's clearly in the pragmatist camp, and the purists on the left are going to criticize her, but sure, she'll be picked apart by people on the right.
Let me throw this one to Patrick. This is from Vincent Bruce. The question here is, Wisconsin is in the top 5 nationally in ACT scores and graduation rate, yet Republicans want to allow high school dropouts to be able to teach in our schools. And they also Republicans want to set up a second school system statewide. meaning
Another
private
question
vouchers.
straight down the middle.
Yeah. We get them from both sides, not many down the middle. So the question, Patrick, is any possible negative repercussions for Republicans for pushing those things?
Well, we talked about the teacher licensing before, and that remains to be seen what's ultimately in the budget. And I think that Christian had a good point that what's allowed and what school districts actually go forward with are two different things. As for the voucher expansion, I think that is going to be a controversial issue. Ultimately, we do have a statewide voucher program. It's very small. It's capped at 1,000 students. What they're looking at doing it now would widen it considerably. We've had school choice in Milwaukee for a long time and Racine for a short time, but to bring it, open it to Madison and Green Bay and Beloit, those communities are going to react in very different ways, and we'll see what the political consequences are. That some districts are going to love it, some are going to hate
And
it.
also it depends on what sort of schools you end up forming. If the schools are successful, then it's not so much a problem. If you have schools that shut down and cause lots of havoc, then
Can we just make sure that clip is on YouTube, though? Christian is right.
No. I think I made that point.
Actually, it was Dan's point. All right, here's a question from Jane who says, if they extend the tax I'll throw it to Dan first. If they extend the tax for the convention center, isn't that more taxes? I thought everyone said there would be no new taxes for the arena.
Well, I think people on the left will say, yes, that's a new tax, and I think Robin Voss is going to say, no, it's not a new tax. But it is a tax that is, it appears, set to sunset, and if you extend it, then I guess you could argue. Oh, we turn that over to the PolitiFact team, but I think
We'll have them in next week and working on that one.
it's mostly true that would be a tax increase.
Let me ask one to Christian, and then we'll close. This is also on the arena deal from Not My Money, who says, how are the taxpayers protected in this arena deal? The county couldn't collect the debt, but now we think the state will be able to, and won't county taxpayers just be out the $80 million and make it up with taxes?
Yeah, I mean, this is crazy. Abley's able to get a deal without throwing any money on the table, like writing $80 million on a napkin and throwing it on the table. And now the state's going to be like Dog the Bounty Hunter and go find these people that can't pay $80 million worth of phone bills like they're in college.
Maybe Chris could cover it if they come up short.
All right, that's where we're going to leave it for this week. We thank everyone for joining us. We'll be back next week. And if you are afraid you'll miss us, you can always subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. See you next week.